Abner has shrunk my screen, so all I see is Roy and Marlene and Sharon. I saw Ruth a while ago with a bunch of other names that are on Zoom. Good morning to you. And good morning to everyone here. Today, obviously Marge is not here to greet you and make you feel warm and welcome, but you can see Marge on the screen. She's in Texas. Anyway, today's lesson, before I get into that, there's a card that's circulating now that Linda has just put out. And this card is going to go to Helen Cannell. So if you wouldn't mind, if you don't know Helen, she's been a friend of mine for many years, as was her husband, Frank. And that's what that's about. Helen is. Today's lesson is two expectant dads. And interesting question. These are about two guys that are obviously, well, one of them's not married, but yeah. And the question came up about courtships. Do you know how your parents met? I mean, was there a lot of discussion about that as you were growing up? How they met? Or was there anything unusual or odd or interesting about your parents' courtship? I know absolutely nothing about my parents, how they met. Nothing. And I was interested if there's something that stands out in your mind about your parents or a couple that you knew that had an unusual way of getting together or a courtship. Yeah.
My parents were set up on a blind date. My mother's best friend really liked my dad. So she thought that if she set her up with my mom, because he would hate her, that he would fall in love with this other woman. Didn't work out. And when my dad was dying, he died of cancer about 12 years ago. And I asked him, I said, so Dad, what was your best date with Mom?
Yeah.
And he said, the first one. And I said, oh, she got you on hello? And he said, yeah.
Yeah. You know, in the Adventist world, most everybody meets at academy or they meet at college or they meet. So you kind of know the routine there. But I have no idea how my parents got together. Do you know how your parents picked your name? Was it obvious what they were going to name? I was named after my dad's first name. Anybody have any unusual way to pick a name that you remember that you were named or your friends were named or that come up in your life at all? When you were growing up, who was your significant role model? Was it your mom, your dad, another relative, friend, teacher, pastor, sports hero? Mine was my grandmother. She was my role model, my aunt. I had good parents, but those two stand out. What about you? Was it your mom?
My daddy died when I was a year and a half, so I don't remember the gentleman. And those of you who remember the old Uncle Arthur's bedtime stories,
Yeah.
he's the gentleman that posed for the picture where Abel is kneeling at the altar. That's the gentleman that was the role model in my life. He was part of my life, still is. He's 92 years old now, but we still communicate. He was my father image.
Anybody else? Role model.
I think what's interesting about role models is that role models model what you admire, and they also can model what you're not going to be like.
Yeah.
You know, they serve an example of, I'm not gonna do that. And it's pretty, I think it's reasonably typical to have a father or a mother or a grandfather and grandmother be a role model. My father, there's some things that I certainly admire about him. And there are certainly some things that I decided I am not gonna do that or be like that. And it was very impressionable.
Yeah. Did you, when you were at West Point, you told me once about this teacher or officer that could be pretty tough on you. He inspected your rooms or something, and you had a big 8.5 by 11
Yeah.
picture of him on your
Yeah,
desk.
yeah, that's right, I did. John Zopke, he's a good friend of mine today. He was my TAC officer then. And so at West Point, you know, everything was sanitized. You know, your socks were rolled up a certain way, sitting in your drawer in the same place. You could open up a drawer out of all 5,000 of those cadets, and that top drawer was gonna look the same for the first one as the 5,000. You were allowed to have one picture on your desk. And most people had a picture of their girlfriend or their family. I mean, that's what most of the time. I had a picture of the professional picture of my TAC officer on my desk. So when he would come in on Saturday morning inspecting my room, he would see the one picture of himself on my desk. And years later, he said, every time I went in there, I just roared and I laughed. And I said, yeah, and so that diverted you from really doing the inspection you should have been done. Which was my plan, by the way. So I'm smarter than I look. Yeah.
As I became older, when I was in high school, I had the teacher who was a role model. This guy, you know, we grew up in the country and we had our Sabbath shoes. You know, we had one pair of shoes and all that. You had to get everything shined up. This guy, we had maybe one blazer or one sport coat. This guy had 20 sport coats. This guy had 20 pairs of shoes. This guy had tons of ties. And he was brilliant and young. And he was a big influence on me. He encouraged me to go to college. Nobody had gone to college where I came from. So it was a big deal. He was quite a role model. What couple that comes to your mind in a marriage is a role model? Anybody? Who was your role model when it came to marriage? Does anything like that come to your mind? As I was growing up, I saw certain families, and I would not want to be a part of that family. And I saw certain families, and I thought, wow, this must be amazing to live. And those kind of things. And I have a couple in mind right now that I think was a great role model for a marriage. It was Frank and Helen Camille. I knew them for 30-something years, and it was a good marriage. And there's others. I've seen other good marriages. And I have seen some tough ones, some rough ones. Let's review. Let's talk about where we've been. I'll give you a quick 2-minute update here. The year is 6 BC. Herod is king of Judah. This is Herod, great builder, Herod the Great. He was the first of the Herodian kings, and he was ruthless, famous for the buildings he developed. His greatest undertaking was rebuilding the temple, which took 46 years and was not completed until after his death. Zechariah is a very old senior priest, and his division is on duty at the temple. And by sheer luck, I mean they drew straws or cast lots or something. Zechariah has a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to go into the temple to burn incense. And all the assembled worshipers are outside. And we learned from Doug a couple of weeks ago, or maybe last week, we think of Zechariah just going in on a routine basis and burning incense. He's old now. He's never done this before. This is a great honor. When he enters this area, he's stunned to see an angel standing at the right side of the altar of incense, and he's gripped with fear. And the angel says, and sees he's terrified and tells him not to be afraid. And then he tells him that his prayers have been answered. His wife is going to have a baby. The angel is beyond belief enough, and now he's told that his wife, who's old enough to be a grandmother, is going to have a baby. And the angel says the baby will be a delight, and will grow strong, and will be like Elijah with great power, and will do wonderful things for God's people. Zechariah is in disbelief and questions how this can be since they're old. The angel tells him that it's all true, every word, and that he is Gabriel and he stands in the presence of God. Now, I got to thinking about that part. We won't spend much time on it, but obviously some angels don't stand in the presence of God. This one does. Gabriel tells him that because of his lack of faith, he will not speak to the baby. He won't speak until the baby is born. He's also told what to name the baby, and the baby's name is to be John. When Zechariah goes outside, he can't speak, and the people realize that he's seen a vision. He's gone. He goes home, and his wife does become pregnant, but she stays in seclusion for 5 months. And Elizabeth states that God has now shown her favor and taken away her disgrace. Then, I don't know if it's Gabriel, but another angel goes to see this young teenage girl named Mary. She lives in Nazareth. She's pledged to be married. And the angel tells her that she will be with child. She will be pregnant before she gets married through an unimaginable process. That this child will reign over the house of Judah forever, and his kingdom will never end. The angel tells her, and believe it or not, your cousin Elizabeth, who was supposedly barren in her old age, is now 6 months pregnant. So Mary packs up and hurries over to see her cousin. We think it's her cousin, could have been her aunt, not sure, Elizabeth. Mary is now, after this baby is born, she stays. Mary is now 3 months pregnant. And she goes back to Nazareth. In those days, just going home and being pregnant would, I'm sure, give one a moment of pause. So, with that, we're going to turn to Luke 1:57 through 79. If you don't have a harmony, we have a few up here. Anybody need a harmony?
I just want to borrow it once more.
We need 2 back here, Abner.
I forgot.
Abner.
Just back on Article 5, Luke 1:26 says it was Gabriel who came to Mary.
It says what?
It was Gabriel.
It was Gabriel.
And Doug talked about
Right.
Gabriel's only mentioned 4 times, a couple in Daniel, and then here, both prophesying that Savior's birth.
Yeah, but it does say Gabriel was the angel. Yeah, he did appear to Samuel's mother. Yes.
Do you think that that was an active prayer of Zechariah? Says your prayers have been answered? Or was this a prayer that was 50 years old? Because he's an old man. Is he praying for a baby now?
I wouldn't think, but I would say in his younger age, and we're going to get into this, how traumatizing it was in that culture not to have children. But I would say that he'd given up by now.
I would think so.
I know I would have.
Abraham had too.
I think we probably have a long history of prayers with his wife about why this was happening to him. Let me get closer so I can hear you.
Maybe his active prayers were no longer for the child before the Messiah to come. Maybe those active prayers were being answered.
Yeah, could be. Could be, yes.
I don't understand him giving up like that. I'd keep trying.
Yeah, you know.
I don't know, buddy. He's an American boy.
when I really got interested, about 30 years ago in the Bible, and I was really surprised when Leon, which Leon doesn't come here. Leon was a big force in getting this class started 10 years ago. He's a little tiny guy. Remember him? Biblical scholar. Do you realize that Jacob, when he met Rachel, was 69 years old?
Really?
69 years old. That's shocking. And it was like, hey, it's always tomorrow, so where are you hanging there, buddy? I'll start picking out names, but you hang in there. I'll tell you what, if that happens, Larry, Judy and me are gonna throw a big party at my house, we're gonna celebrate.
Hard to celebrate. I just want to celebrate.
Oh, but who was the old senator from South Carolina? The old racist guy that died about 20 years ago.
Strom Thurmond.
How old was he when he had a child? 69?
I don't think she was that old.
No, she wasn't. When they had to wheel him into the chamber of the vote, he was so sick, and then they wheel him out, so he could raise his hand, and they put him back down. Yeah, we've got a lot of stories about late births and this kind of stuff. So anyway, let me start reading Luke 1:57 through 79. And it has been our custom, well, now that we're back in our customary class here, I'll read a few verses and you pick it up from there. And don't hesitate, just jump in. This is Luke 1:57 through 79. When it was time for Elizabeth to have her baby, she gave birth to a son. Her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown her great mercy, and they shared her joy. And on the 8th day, they came to circumcise the child, and they were going to name him after his father, Zechariah. But his mother spoke up and said, "No, he's to be called John." And they said to her, "There's no one among your relatives who has that name." Verse 62.
Then they made signs to his father to find out what he would like to name the child. He asked for a writing tablet, and to everyone's astonishment, he wrote, "His name is John." Immediately his mouth was open and his tongue was loosed, and he began to speak, praising God. The neighbors were all filled with awe, and throughout the hill country of Judea, people were talking about all the things. Everyone who heard this wondered about it, asking, "When then is this child going to be?" For the Lord's hand was with him.
Father Zechariah was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come and has redeemed his people. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David. As he said through his holy prophets of long ago, salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us, to show mercy to our Father, remember his holy covenant. The oath he swore to our father Abraham, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies and to enable us to serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all our days."
And you, my child, will be called the prophet of the Most High, for you will go on before the Lord to prepare the way for him, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins. Because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven, to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace.
Give you a little background, which I'm always sort of amazed about that culture. Now, we obviously already know that this baby is going to be a boy. Been told that. But in most cases, in all cases, nobody knew what sex the child would be in those days. Or in my time, you know, the fathers would be supposedly out in the waiting room pacing, smoking a cigar and all that, and then they didn't know what the baby was going to be, a boy or girl, and the nurse would come out and tell them and all this. In Palestine, the birth of a boy was an occasion of great joy. I want you ladies especially to hear this.
Thank
This
you.
will make your day. Okay? In Palestine, the birth of a boy was an occasion of great joy. When the time of birth was near, friends, family, and local musicians gathered near the house. If the birth was of a boy, the musicians broke out into music and song and celebration. If the birth was a girl, the musicians silently packed up and went away quietly. Congratulations. Congratulations, you've got a girl. Well, all right. Naming the baby. On the 8th day, the child was circumcised and was given a name. Naming a child was considered very important in that culture. Some of the names would be descriptive. They would describe things. Who do we remember in all these stories through the years when a child was born? Remember, some names were meant things. Who comes to your mind when you think of a child's name meaning something? Anything come out?
Isaac.
All right. What does Isaac mean?
Laughter.
Laughter. Yeah. You know, did mom laugh when she heard, I believe we decided that was Jesus that came to see her husband, those 3 men, and she laughed about it. So, anybody else?
Hosea's kids had terrible names.
I'm sorry?
Hosea's kids had terrible names.
Yeah.
I think Jacob was supplanter. Yeah. Heel grabber.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I think Jacob was supplanter or heel grabber.
Yeah, that's what I have. Jacob means heel grabber. And Esau, remember what his brother's name meant? He's red. Esau means red. And Jacob means heel grabber. So just imagine being stuck with heel grabber for the rest of your life. Sometimes the child received a parental name.
Methuselah.
But in Zechariah's case, no one was named John. And let me ask you this. These questions seem kind of elementary, but they answer a lot of questions about the culture that these people lived in. How did Elizabeth know the baby's name was to be John? How do you think?
Zechariah could write.
Zechariah wrote it, probably. Yeah, here's the problem with that. In that culture, women were not taught how to read. Only the boys were taught how to read. So, as we talk about this couple, yes?
Well, if it was important for Zechariah to communicate with his wife for the next 9 months, and if she can't read, then he can write stuff down and say, hey, read this to her.
Yeah.
It's not like he's gonna be like not telling her anything about this whole anything for the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. He obviously had taught her how to read. You remember, who was the, can't speak, but you remember the story that Victor Borgo would always tell? Remember the guy that was a comedian, a classical? He said that he had 2 neighbors that were deaf, and they would walk the track around the area where he lived. And one day, apparently, they got in a big argument. And they were doing all the sign languages and everything. And finally, one of them says, you don't have to yell, I'm not blind, you know. So anyway, we believe that Zechariah taught his wife how to read. Women were not taught to be literate in that culture.
If that's true, how Mary is the first case of homeschooling her children. If she couldn't read, how does she teach Jesus to read? Because he didn't go to the schools of the prophets.
His father,
That's a great
Joseph.
question.
Maybe it was Joseph.
Guess what?
Maybe Joseph is the one that taught him how to read.
Just a quick another, and I'm not your historical, I need Leon here to be the historical guy here, a biblical scholar. In those days, we have this picture of Mary holding Jesus on her knee, and they're going through Uncle Arthur's Bible studies and stories of that. That didn't happen. The man was the guy that taught the child and read to him. Joseph taught Jesus all these things, how to read, how to study, all the historical aspects of his heritage. And I think that we studied recently that Jesus quotes 46 verses, 56, something like that, in the Gospels. We read where he was quoted.
There's also oral history. The women would have been in on that.
Women were what?
Oral history.
Oral history.
Oral history is no respecter of person. They would have been there when the stories were told by the father.
Yeah. So, but we had a little class on that a few months ago. Joseph was the person that educated Jesus. They were to teach them a trade, they were get educated. They were to teach them how to protect their family, how to fight, or whatever. And they also kind of got involved with helping them find a wife. Remember Abraham, Isaac? This was sort of the norm for those people in that day. Boy, when I get in trouble like this, you can chime in any second, okay? To help me here.
Ken?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just thinking, even though women may not have known how to read, yet I believe that they probably compensated for that by having very good memories and memorizing great passages of the Bible and be able to convey these and teach these to their children. So even though Joseph may have taught Jesus to read and taught him a trade, I believe that there were many aspects of life and about God and about the things of God that came from Mary and not from Joseph.
Absolutely. I mean, you can think about your mother telling you about the history of her family. You know, that happened to me throughout my life. That my mother was constantly telling me about Uncle so-and-so, great somebody was doing this or that. So I think you're right on the money, Larry. She was probably right in the mix with helping educate. So, yeah, we have a question back here.
We got a comment. Humanities.
Let me get clear. I'm the only deaf teacher in the church, so I don't read lips.
Okay, wasn't Zechariah both deaf and dumb? He could not speak or hear. He could hear.
He could hear.
But if you read, says that they had to sign into the.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I think what we're reading so far is that he couldn't speak, but he couldn't hear.
Check it out.
Okay. We will, yeah.
Is there a Bible verse you're talking about? Yes. What is it? Okay. Well, I'll just stick. Okay, I'll speak up.
Oh, okay. Sorry,
But she just,
I couldn't hear it either.
Yeah, I hear, yeah. She believed that he was both deaf and could not speak, I believe is what we're saying.
Ken?
Yeah.
I always think about when Mary says, when they say about Mary, and she pondered these things in her heart. And she had a story to tell Jesus.
Yeah, oh, that for sure.
She certainly had a story to tell Jesus. And because she pondered all these things, she probably had to think a lot about what her responsibility was going to be and what she needed to teach him.
Oh, yeah. I can't imagine not telling him as he grew up about fleeing to Egypt, about the wise men coming, about, the babies that were killed in Bethlehem. I'm sure she shared all these things with him. How could she hold that in? I mean, this is a huge adventure that these people were on. Did I miss anything? Yes, sir.
I think it's important not to forget that the mother not only could teach what she knew of the Bible, but she taught him how to live, what kind of a person to be. She taught him respect, she taught him honesty. She was the one that did that.
Yeah, I mean, she was obviously a great mother. I mean, you have to remember that the largest religion in the world holds her in high regard, the Virgin Mary. If you're a Catholic, Mary is right up the top of the heap there as far as your religious values. Yes.
Luke 1:62.
I'm sorry,
Luke 1:62.
verse 162.
Luke 1:62.
All right. Let me read that. Luke 1:62.
Page 19, number 7.
Somebody read that.
Yeah, then they made signs to his father to find out what he would like to name the child.
Yeah.
He asked for a writing tablet, and to everyone's astonishment, he wrote, his name is John.
So he had to be deaf as well.
Yeah.
What's kind of weird though is because maybe they just assumed he was deaf, but he wasn't. Because the next verse it says, so he, Zechariah, he asked for a writing tablet. How do you ask for a writing tablet if you're not speaking?
Let me tell you
It
what.
doesn't say that he
We'll
signed.
move on from this, but let me tell you what the scholars are saying. And I did make a note of this. They handed him thinking he was deaf.
Yeah.
But he was not.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying anyone's wrong, but from what my research was this week, that's what I came up with, and I could totally be wrong. So I'm not hanging my hat on that one. Yes, sir.
One of the things that struck me about this story is that, when Jesus was born, he was born under a cloud of an unwed mother. And he wasn't well received where he lived. You look at this story and John's parents and John himself, it talks about how momentous this event was, how people received him with great joy, et cetera, et cetera. Seems like God went way out of his way to give John the reputation that he could help point people to Christ.
Yeah. Yes. Chat, what do we got? Verse 64 says that his mouth was open and his tongue was loose. No mention of ear. Yeah, that's what I picked up when I was reading this. MacArthur is a scholar that I've been reading from some of his work here. But the whole point of this, I miss anybody? The whole point of this, that Zechariah was very supportive of his wife. Even though there have been great disappointments with no children. And he shows support for his wife by agreeing with her decision. This might seem like a very small thing, but the decision to obey in the small things is the beginning of true character. And this lesson will be about character today. We're going to study about a guy in just a minute that shows true character under great pressure. Thoughts become words. This seems very simple. Your thoughts become words, obviously. Words become actions. Actions become habits. Habits become character. Your thoughts will be the way you behave. Your will or God's will is the question. When Elizabeth was a young wife, how or what do you think she was planning? I was going to ask, probably would have embarrassed them. They didn't show up, but there's a young couple that comes in every week. I'm going to throw this question to them, but the question is, Elizabeth is a young woman at a certain time in her life. She's just married, or she's going to get married. How do you think she was planning her life as a young Jewish girl? How was she going to see herself in the next few years? What do you think was going to happen? in that house. How did she have this visualized?
Ken,
Yes, let Ruth.
children were considered a blessing from the Lord, and in cultures where children, and especially male children, were extremely valuable and wanted, it is to Zechariah's credit that he and Elizabeth remained childless, because he could have gone out, taken another wife, another concubine, to raise up a seed in his name.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
Well, I think it was every Jewish girl's dream is to have the Messiah. So every girl dreamed that their child would be.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that's where I was kind of going. She had it kind of all wrapped up in a nice little box. We're going to get married. We'll have some kids. My husband's a respected priest. He's a good minister, and I'll have this life, this a minister's wife or a priest's wife. We'll have kids running everywhere, and we'll just live happily ever after. It didn't happen. The question this morning is, when you were this age, did your life turn out exactly like you had it in your little box? When you're 19, 20, 21? I doubt it. Mine did not. Yes. Archive also indicated it was more likely for a woman to be educated during the BC area. It was more likely for women. It indicates that the first rise of Islam and the seclusion of women in this religion movement had an influence upon Judaism, particularly above the scholars in Babylon. Large Jewish communities remained or lack the surrounding areas till around World War II. Also, there is some indication of some female Jewish scholars, though there were few. This would explain the rise of such women as Deborah, the prophet. Good point. Who wrote that?
It's like Caitlin.
Yeah.
Caitlin, was that you? I think that was Caitlin.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank
yes, I did some reading.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. But the little box that we think our lives are going to be in don't necessarily happen the way we think it is.
So you're saying just don't give up. It could go back in the box later on in life.
Larry's going to, but I don't think I'm going to get back in the box.
82 years old.
Your character becomes your destiny for good or for bad. And the point is, a decision in small things sets the course. But Elizabeth never lost her faith. That's the whole point. She never gave up. I think she gave up, of course, on having a child. Obviously, just like Sarah did. In spite of the persecution, she made a conscious effort. And I think we've already answered this question. What was the persecution that she was going through from her culture? She felt she was being persecuted. Because it says, in these days, in verse 25, it says, in these days, he has shown his favor and taken away my disgrace among the people.
Child.
If you didn't have a child, yeah, John.
So that being the situation in that country and in that culture, I would assume that a priest and his wife would continuously seek God in prayer, fasting, and so forth, trying to get their lives in order so that God would bless them.
Yeah.
And finally it worked.
Yeah. I never gave up. I don't know what their plans were, but they never seemed to have lost their faith. If you're, think about this, I don't want to get out on this cultural thing, but it always amazes me. If you're not married and you're going to have a child, you are disgraced. If you are married and you don't have any children, you're disgraced. That's a tough crowd to deal with. That's tough.
Feeding tidbit trivial thing that's gone through my mind is, we don't know who was infertile. Was it Zechariah? was it Elizabeth?
No.
So when, ever so coincidentally, I'm wondering if it's possible Gabriel being the messenger of both pregnancies, that both of them were immaculately conceived.
It does say that she was barren, though. Whether that means if she was infertile, it says she was barren.
I would assume so. You know, Sarah, in Sarah's case, after she had her baby and died, Abraham went on and fathered more children. So we know where the issue might have been there, but you're getting above my head now. But this was a very tough culture to be in. Then, man, this is Zechariah's benediction. It's called a benedictus. When Zechariah came out of the temple 9 months earlier, he was to give a benediction to the people, but he couldn't because he couldn't speak. And he had 9 months to think this over. Many scholars believe that for 9 months, he had been studying faithfully about what the prophets had to say about the Messiah and the forerunners that were coming. Zechariah is filled with the Spirit when this baby is finally born in its name, and he breaks out into the song. And that's what we have in the last part of this lesson. And the question this morning I want to ask is there a separation in your Bible between verse 75 and verse 76? Can you see a gap?
Yeah.
You do. Who is the first part of this story? This benediction. Who is the first part? Does it become plain to you who this is about? It's about Jesus. And he says he has raised up a horn of salvation in the house of his servant David. Well, that tells you that this is about Jesus because he's from the house of David. John is from 2 Levites. So the first part is about Jesus. And the second part is about his son. But let's go back to verse 74. And I'm going to have to move on here. Verse 74, this is where faith comes in again. It's plainly says, he is to rescue us from the hand of our enemies and enable us to serve with him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him in all days. So, faith question. Did Jesus rescue his people from the Romans? He didn't. 336 years later, the Romans are still there. This is a faith question. The world will be saved and the world will be free. We just don't know exactly when. But the Romans were still there hundreds of years after Jesus died. And then you say, well, my faith is weak or shaky or inadequate. I don't know what to believe anymore. I mean, I listen to these people and they say this, I listen to these people and they say, oh, well, this is the way it is. It's hard to have faith in what we hear. So faith in what we hear is not the issue. The faith is in what we read. And what are we reading? In Mark, we hear the story over and over again about the man who came to Jesus with a sick child. And he talks about, he asked Jesus if he'll help him. And he said, yeah, if you believe, I do believe. He said, but you got to help me with my unbelief. That's the hard part. Everybody has shaky faith at times. I am among the group with a shaky faith. I need to recharge. When you're going to visit a friend for the last time, like I'm going to this weekend, the last time you'll see her, as strong as your faith, as strong as her faith. Faith is the only way out of this thing. And it always becomes a question of how strong is your faith. Let's move to Matthew 1:18 through 25.
I think one point.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too far off this because this is maybe off the trail. But I think it's worth to make a comment about what do you do or what happens when your faith does weaken. What armor do you have? Because it happens. What happens to me when my faith gets weak? Or you? My prayer is that when my faith gets weak, you are standing at my door. And when your faith gets weak, I'm standing at your door. I think it's really important for us to understand how much we need each other.
Yes. It is. I doubt when we have a crisis with faith that Gabriel's going to show up in our living room. We have each other, we have our church, and we have our beliefs.
Yeah, Gabriel's not, but you are. And there's no less power in that visit, in my view. No less.
Seems to me somewhere I read that we are not to depend on our faith, but we are to depend on Christ's faith in our lives.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not sometimes how much faith we have in God, but how much faith God has in us. That's where we get all crossways. That's the big ticket out. We don't think we'll ever have enough faith unless we understand how much faith that God continues to have in each life that we see here. Okay. Let's go to Matthew 1. Yes.
What I was going to talk a little bit about is the fact that last week we talked about Mary being there for 3 months at the end of Elizabeth's pregnancy. And with Zechariah not speaking, I think there was an environment that was created between the three of them that really led to the prophecy of Zechariah and what he was saying to humanity. God was saying to humanity through him. And so I see, as you pointed out, that the first part was about Jesus and the second part was about John. But when you look at the fact that in John, it says he'll be called the prophet of the Most High. To me, that was very outstanding that he could see that so clearly from the 3-month experience, I think, that they had together.
Yeah. Yeah. And what did Jesus say about John?
No greater prophet than John.
No greater. Nobody's ever been even more than Elijah. Thank you, Roy. Let's go to it's Article 8 in your harmony, and it's Matthew 1:18 through 25. And I'll start reading, and then this is very short. I'll read a couple. Let me just read it all because we're gonna. I want to talk about this. This is how the birth of Jesus Christ came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be with child through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was a righteous man and did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. But after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord has said to the prophets. This virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel ordered, commanded him, and took Mary home as his wife. But he had no union with her until she gave birth to a son. We have two stories. Both stories have had an angel appear. Yes, sir.
It just struck me that the angel doesn't say he will save his people. It says he'll save them from their sins, not from the Romans.
Yes, good point.
Ken, I was thinking the same thing. The perspective here has got to be when Zechariah talks about John, but talks about Jesus, he said, we have been rescued from our enemies. People immediately thought of our enemies as the Romans. What did Jesus say? My kingdom is not of this world. So when we are beset by problems around us, we need to put a perspective on this that says, wait a minute, what's going on in the world is not the problem. What's going on between me and God, with my sins, whatever, that's the problem. Yeah. And if we put that perspective on it, it makes a whole lot of difference.
Yeah. Yeah, we got a time on where we really are.
Can I add a thought?
Yeah, okay.
I think it was easy for the Jews to kind of misinterpret the predictions about Christ because of their understanding of the consequences of sin. You know, you look at when the story of the blind man that Jesus heals and his disciples say, who sinned, this man or his family? So they very much viewed their oppression under political powers as a direct result of their sin. So it could very easily then jump to, if he's saving us from our sins, he's also saving us from Roman rule.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, again, a tough crowd, tough way to live. And thank you for that, Kevin. What is going through Joseph's mind when he learns Mary's pregnant? What do you think he's thinking?
Who done it?
I don't think so.
What would go through your mind?
I mean, he was a righteous man. He's thinking, what am I going to do? So, you know, his choices are, you can kill her, you can throw out, get her stoned. Yeah, that was an option. An option was to marry her. That was off the table. That wasn't going to happen at this point. The other option was to divorce her and just throw her out, and she's in trouble. You know, society is, I mean, her destiny right now is too bright. And so he didn't consider the marriage thing until the dream came. And I don't think, but he's a righteous guy. He was trying to do the right thing. I don't think he was looking at who'd done it, because I don't think this was I don't think it was necessarily a vindictive environment. His mind. What do I do? I think he was trying to think.
What do you think his best friend told him when he discussed it with him? He probably had a righteous friend. They're talking about it. I'm sure he discussed it with somebody at confident. It's like, look, you're a lot older than she is. She's only 15. By the way, my mother got married when she was 15. But that's all, you have to be careful of the outcome with what happened. So, you're just an old guy, and you're just infatuated. And this is a really good-looking young girl, and she made a mistake. You just need to get out of this deal while you can. Yeah. It's too late. And then she's coming to him with this ridiculous tale. I'm pregnant, but it's not the way you think it is. He's thinking, wow. He's probably thinking, I should have known, I'm a lot older, I've already got children. I just was so stupid. I fell for this. Yes.
I think God had to let it happen this way, that Joseph came to the point of just putting her away privately, so that everyone would know it was not Joseph's son.
Yeah.
Because they would assume otherwise that it was his son, he was just of human origin.
Yeah.
So God had to make that distinction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, if he knew it, then if he married her, then people would think that he was the one that knocked her up before they got married. Otherwise, he wouldn't have married her.
Right. It's just not a good situation. But he's about to lose his reputation. He'll lose his standing in the community. He'll probably lose his business. And this could cause him a lot of problems with his other kids. He has other children. See, Joseph no longer trusts Mary. How could he? Sure. He does not trust her, but he does love her. But Joseph is a righteous man. The Greek word used for righteous man means innocent, without fault, holy, just. The only way to find, well, let me rephrase this. God's will or your will. You know? Joseph is under tremendous stress. Tremendous stress. Have you ever been in this situation? You don't know what to do. I mean, the switch coming out, you can't sleep. You don't know, you can't eat. Your world is crashing in on you. I have a couple of 2 or 3 times. I've been there. I've lived it. I want to show you a clip. It's about 10 seconds, 15 seconds long. This to me is one of the greatest clips about good people who run into really big problems that I've ever seen. You get that far up, Abner, and I always keep this handy.
Yeah.
This is Jimmy Stewart. He plays George Bailey in this movie. George had always wanted to leave the small old town he grew up in. He gave it up for the girl he loved. He also wanted to help the poor people in his town and townhome, so he became the president of his dad's tiny little savings and loan. His salary was cheap. He couldn't really give his family what they wanted, but he was respected.
Yeah, Merry Christmas! Glad you come. How about some of that good spaghetti? We got everything. God. Oh, God. Dear Father in heaven, I'm not a praying man, but if you're up there and you can hear me, show me the way. I'm at the end of my rope. Show me the way, oh God.
I've been there. It's not a good place to be. John was there last year with his daughter in India. Bad situation. You don't know what to do. You don't know how to get out of this mess. You don't know what to do. I want to talk about the characteristics in the time we've got left of honorable people. George Bailey was honorable. These characteristics lead to great people, or very, very good people. According to researchers, empathy and compassion for others are key variables that contribute to good character. These traits will manifest themselves sometimes heroically in the face of danger or opposition to provide safety and well-being for other people. These people make very good women and very good men. You got that list? I just want to show you this list, and I want to refer to Joseph. And I want you to tell me, in this story, how does bravery equate to Joseph? What did he do to you that you thought was brave? Just anyone. Yes.
As soon as he had the dream, the vision from the angel, he immediately took Mary as his wife. He protected her from the community. He protected Jesus from the community. And it didn't matter what anybody said. He taught Jesus a trade. He taught Jesus how to read and write. He and Mary both taught Jesus the stories that made him answer questions in the temple at 12 years old.
I don't know how we separate bravery and conviction, but do you think he was convicted? Yes.
When you say you've been there several times in your life.
Yeah.
Did a dream ever solve your problem?
No, a dream once caused me a problem.
To have this dream and have it to be so real that he does a 180.
Yeah.
That's going to be quite a dream.
No. Someday I'll share that dream with you. That's how I met Gordon Beach, the former university president, about 30 years ago. Courage. Maurice.
I'm just wondering how many times we may have dreams that are from God, but we don't recognize them and therefore we don't act on
them. Yeah.
Joseph somehow seemed to know that this was from God and he acted on it, and that was to his credit.
Hey, Ken, this is Tiffany. Can I make a comment?
Sure.
So something that sticks out to me in this particular study is that it doesn't say that Joseph was afraid. The angel actually says, or in the verse, it says that the angel told him not to be afraid to take Mary. So in a lot of the stuff that we've studied so far, it mentions to whomever the angel is appearing to for the individual not to be afraid. And it's not in the vision, it's not telling Joseph not to fear. It's giving him a specific thing that he shouldn't fear. And to me, that's very interesting because the angel always says to the person, do not be afraid. And in this vision that Joseph has, it's just telling him not to be afraid to take Mary, not in general to be fearful. So this in itself, to me, is a very clear depiction of his courage and bravery. And, you know, he's a very spiritual man trying to make the right decision. He doesn't completely fear the entire scenario. The only part of it that feels unknown to him or uncomfortable to him is the part about Mary. And I think that that's such a interesting picture to paint in comparison to when the angels visit other people in the few studies we've covered in this book.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great comment. Yeah, well, pop those back up there. And I just want to we're running out of time, but when bravery, yes, he did exactly what the angel said, courage. Well, he risked his family and his business, determination. Well, he took Mary on a trip. He was determined that he wasn't going to be separated from her. And if you're 9 months pregnant riding on a donkey, that's pretty a lot of courage with Mary too. Helpful, probably delivered the baby. That's pretty helpful.
Someone's got to be there to catch it.
Honest, was forthcoming about the pregnancy, inspirational, moral integrity. He would not have sex with his wife before the baby was born. Yes.
Well, I'm just wondering.
Let's have a broken over report. Go ahead.
Third,
okay.
My count. I was just wondering whether the people in that town looked down on them, not because Jesus was born from another father, but because she and Joseph had relations before they were married. What are you saying?
What?
Does that make any sense to you?
No.
Come on, you guys are not that.
Listen, just get with me. I'll give you about 30 seconds after the class. I like you. Okay, get with me. Have you ever loved someone but you couldn't trust them? And I'll leave you with this. Okay? And this is another total lesson in itself. I got interested in this church in 93, 97, 98, after being raised in it. those were the years because of a book that came out that told me that 2 million Adventists had left the church in North America. That really, and there were only 1 million members at the time. Now, this is old news. Some of it is new, but it really changed my perspective on this. You got 1 million on the books and 2 million have left. And only half of those go to church 4 times once a month. Only half of those go to church. So that's how this whole class came about. Have you ever loved something but you couldn't trust it? There were 2 million plus Adventists in North America who have left our church. They don't trust us to come back because they've either been hurt or discouraged or they don't agree. Now, I know a lot of you can't believe that number, but it came from your church. Monty Saline is your statistic. He's the big guy in DC that keeps up with all these numbers. Monty Saline. I didn't make this up. He published that. The book was published using his statistics. Have you ever loved something but you couldn't trust it? There are, it's believed, 30 to 40,000 ex-Adventists in the Chattanooga area. Now, this is a long way from Mary and Joseph. But Joseph loved something, but he couldn't trust it at first. This class is about getting people to trust us to come back one time. Just come back one time and see if it hasn't changed. To trust someone that you loved or you divorced or whatever, there has to be change or you can't love them again. If you've had an unfaithful wife or an unfaithful, whatever, you have to prove to this person that you have changed. I think this church and this class shows a different perspective on where we are than where we were 30 or 40 years ago. In the way we do things. This is a gospel-based class. This is a Bible-based class. And it's shocking. But it's true. Those folks don't trust, they don't feel comfortable coming back to the church. So, now that I've sprung that on you.
Ken, just a little
Yes.
side note on that. I was born and raised in the Maryland area, just a few miles from the NAD, and I was the Children's Ministries Director for Chesapeake Conference for about 11 years, and I was in direct contact with the Children's Ministries Department, NAD, and they were revealing that very study. And although everything you're saying is true, that a lot of people's feelings got hurt by something somebody at the church did or said to them. But that is part of why they left. But they also did a survey of Adventists just across the country, and they found out that it was almost 100% Adventists did not believe that they were saved, that they had salvation, because they all thought it was works-based, and the legalism that had permeated in that era of salvation by works had made people very legalistic and unkind towards others and chased them out.
And let me tell you, I spent thousands of dollars on my own survey for the marketing department here at Southern, and we came up with the same conclusions. They were worked to death, and they didn't trust that type of philosophy or religion. So that's a whole new broad thing, but that's what I want to leave you with is this. If you have someone who would like to come back to church, you think, and someone who you think would feel comfortable here, I don't care if you're an ex-Adventist or an ex-Baptist or whatever. By the way, in our study, we decided to not call them ex-Adventists because that's offensive. Because you're always an Adventist, whether you want to believe it or not. You're not going to eat this. I don't care if you're drunk on Friday night. You're not going to eat a hot dog on Saturday morning. Okay? That's just the way we were programmed. So we call them non-attending Adventists. We still consider you part. Whether you trust us or not. So anyway, we're off on another rabbit trail here.
That's another class.
Yeah, that's another class. But I just wanted to leave it with you. Tell your friends about this class. We have a good time in here, I faith most of the time. Maybe when I'm not up front, but Doug makes up for Mayor John does when he's here. So the point is, just have faith. It took a lot of faith for Joseph to get down the road on this deal, but he was an honorable, honest guy who didn't know what to do, but he got through it. And we're at times facing things we don't know what to do, but we get through it with our faith, with our friends, and with our trust in Jesus. That makes sense. John, why don't you have a
Father, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. We behold the glory, glorious by the only Son from the Father. Thank you for us meeting here this morning to help us better understand that word. Thank you for our teacher who so giftedly moderated us to think and to understand what we need to appreciate in that word, in your name.
Thank you. I will be teaching next week, and we will continue